All right, we're about to dive into an absolutely epic story. We're talking power, faith, rebellion, a saga about kings, prophets, and a kingdom that was literally torn in two. But before we get into it, let me ask you this. What if your country's founding heroes weren't just politicians? What if one was a legendary warrior who also wrote world-famous poetry? And what if the others were a crew of fearless activists whose only job was to speak truth to power, no matter what it cost them? Well, that's exactly the world we're about to step into.
So our story kicks off in a time of, well, chaos. See, before there was a unified kingdom with a single crown, things on the ground were way different.
Before there were any kings, the whole system was something else entirely. It was called the era of the judges. And you've got to forget the idea of a single nation. Instead, picture this loose collection of tribes, each led by these incredible figures who were this wild blend of warrior and spiritual guide, people like the prophetess Deborah, who literally led armies into battle. It was totally decentralized.
But eventually, the people started demanding a king, like all the other nations. And this brings us to the three absolute titans who would forge this new kingdom. First up, you've got Saul. He's the trailblazer. Then comes David, the iconic poet-warrior who put Jerusalem on the map for good. And finally, his son, Solomon, the master builder whose wisdom was the stuff of legends. These three are the bedrock for everything that happens next.
And that bedrock leads right to the kingdom's absolute peak, the Golden Age. This whole period is defined by two of the most famous kings in all of history, David and Solomon.
What makes King David so fascinating is just how complex he was. I mean, this guy wasn't just a military genius who conquered Jerusalem and made it his capital. He was also an artist, a musician, a poet. The Book of Psalms, some of the most famous poetry ever written, that's credited to him. He was this incredible mix of a hardcore warrior and a sensitive artist, a super rare combination for any leader.
So after David, his son Solomon takes the throne, and he kicks things up to a whole new level. He wasn't a warrior like his dad. He was a builder, a diplomat, and this was his masterpiece, the first temple in Jerusalem. Now, this wasn't just some big, fancy building. It became the spiritual center, the national heart of the entire people. It was a place for pilgrimage, for prayer, a symbol of their whole identity.
Under Solomon, the kingdom really hit its zenith. I mean, there was peace, unbelievable wealth, and just this explosion of wisdom and culture. It probably felt like this golden age was going to last forever. But, as we all know, history has a way of showing us that the highest peaks tend to cast the longest shadows.
And this is where the story takes a really tragic turn. Because after Solomon dies, all that unity that he and his father had built, it just shatters. The nation goes through what you can only call a brutal, painful divorce.
The kingdom literally split right down the middle. So in the north, you ended up with the kingdom of Israel, which was formed by 10 tribes that just broke away. And in the south, you had the kingdom of Judah. They stayed loyal to David's family line. And this is super important, they held on to the capital city, Jerusalem, and the temple. For hundreds of years, these two kingdoms just existed side by side, sometimes as enemies, sometimes as allies. But that division, it had fatally weakened both of them. Their downfall was kind of staggered, but it was inevitable. First, the powerful Assyrian Empire came in and just conquered the northern kingdom, scattering its people and creating the legend of the 10 lost tribes. Then, more than a century later, the Babylonians showed up and did the same thing to the south, conquering Judah and destroying its capital. Okay, so throughout this whole insane period of kings and wars and kingdoms splitting apart, there was another major force at play, one that we often misunderstand today. It's time to meet the prophets.
Right away, just forget any image you have of some guy with a crystal ball telling fortunes. That is not what a prophet was. A better way to think of them is as the moral conscience of the nation. They were the ultimate activists, the original whistleblowers. Their entire job was to stand up to the most powerful people in the land, especially the kings, and hold them accountable. This quote right here gets to the absolute heart of the prophet's message. They were obsessed with authenticity. They'd see people going through all the religious motions, like bringing sacrifices to the temple, but then turning around and being completely unjust in their daily lives. The prophets called them out on it, basically arguing that empty rituals were worthless. For them, true faith had to be connected to morality and social justice.
So if you were to write a job description for a prophet, it looks something like this. First, be the moral anchor in a sea of political chaos. Second, act as a check on the king's absolute power. Third,
Be fearless in calling out corruption and injustice wherever you see it. And maybe most important of all, constantly remind everyone what their core values are, especially when the leaders have completely lost the plot.
And all of this leads us to the catastrophic finale of the entire First Temple period. It's the moment when the very center of their entire world just could not hold.
In the year 423 BCE, the unthinkable happened. The Babylonian army didn't just conquer Jerusalem, they burned Solomon's temple to the ground. The spiritual heart of the nation was gone. The people of Judah were then forced into exile, marched off to Babylonia. An entire era was just over.
It feels so final, right? Like a total tragedy with no way forward. But here's the thing. Destruction is not the end of this story. In fact, it's the beginning of a whole new, incredible chapter about survival and identity. Which leaves us with this final, massive question. How do you hold a nation together when its physical and spiritual center is just gone? How do you keep your culture and your people alive when your land's been taken, your capital is in ruins, and the most sacred spot in your entire universe has been utterly destroyed? That was the challenge they faced, and how they answered it would literally change the course of history forever.